This is Wendy, and in this series of videos, we're learning how to write our own object-oriented classes. In the first video, we learned how to create and use a basic class. In the second video, we learned about constructor methods. In the third video, we created accessor and mutator methods. In this video, I'll show you how to create a toString method to display objects. And in the last video, I'll show you how to compare objects for equality and inequality. In programming, it's a common thing to want to display an object's state. The state of an object is the values in all of the object's data members. For example, when I have a cat object declared as cat Artie equals new cat, and I've passed it a name and a breed, the state of the Artie cat object is that the name is Artie, the breed is Tawny Tabby, and the hungry is set to true. The cat info method inside the cat class displays the state of a cat object in a specific format. Cat name followed by the actual cat name, and then on the next line, breed followed by Tawny Tabby. Note that it does not, in this case, display the value in the hungry data member. Not only is this kind of state information often needed for output to the user, but often different technologies and frameworks we use, such as JavaFX, JSP Expression Language, or Spring Boot, will want to show or display an object. For example, in JavaFX, you might want to display a list of inventory objects inside a list box. When you put a list of objects into a JavaFX list box, the list box needs to know how to display each object in the list. In Java, this is done using a special method called the toString method. JavaFX will look for the toString method in the inventory class, execute it, take that return value, and that's what it will use to display each of the objects. Most classes have a toString method, and it's another example of polymorphism. Every class's toString method does something slightly different. For example, an account class's toString might display the account ID and the balance. An employee class's toString might display the employee ID, last name, and first name. Note that a toString does not have to display all of the state information of an object. In the design phase, it will be decided what important state information should be shown, whether it's one piece, two pieces of information, or all of the state information. So the basic purpose of the toString is to represent your instances as a string. You can think of it like converting your object into a string. That way, when you place objects into something like a list box, Java will automatically execute the toString method and use that method's output or return value as the value to display. You can add a toString to any one of your classes. All you have to do is create a toString method. The toString method always has a header that starts with public, returns a string object, and it's always called toString, all lowercase letters except for the S, which is capitalized. Also, the toString method accepts no arguments, so there are no parameters. You must never modify this method header. If you change anything, the toString will not work. For example, let's say in our room class, we'd like the toString to return a room as a string in the form length colon followed by the length formatted to 2 decimal places, and then width colon followed by the width formatted to 2 decimal places. When we add our toString, you can actually add the method anywhere you want, but most programmers will prefer to add it near the bottom of the class, or they might place it after the accessor and mutator methods above any other methods in the class. Usually, though, it's somewhere in that bottom half of the class. Again, it doesn't actually matter, but it's just where most programmers are used to seeing the toString. So our toString method would have to build a formatted string that included the length and width as it was specified in the previous screen. So of course I'm going to start off with public string and then toString, no parameters required. Every toString you write is going to follow this exact same method header. And all it's going to do is return a formatted string. In a previous video, we looked at the string.format method, which formats values exactly like the print printf does using a format string with format specifiers, and it actually returns the formatted string instead of printing it to the console. Once again, your object-oriented classes should never print to the console because you're not always going to use them in a console program. For example, a GUI application does not have a console, so if you printed to the console in your class, then you can't use that class in a GUI application. So our string.format, if we follow the formatting we saw, it was the word length and a colon with the actual length, and then the word width and a colon and the actual width. So length, a colon, and the actual length formatted to 2 decimal places, followed by width, a colon, and the actual width formatted to 2 decimal places. And because we're returning the string and we're not printing it directly to the console, we do not add a new line to the end. And we need to pass the format method the value for the first format specifier, which is this object's length, and the value for the second format specifier, which is this object's width. And that's it. That's our toString. Once again, your toString should not return a string that ends with a new line, unless that's what was decided in the design of your class, but usually we don't decide that. The programmer may want to add some output after your toString value on the same line, or maybe they don't. Maybe they do want to add a new line after the toString value. That's fine then. They can just add a new line themselves. It's much easier for the programmer to add a new line that they don't have instead of removing a new line that they don't want. And I just snuck in and added a little bit of documentation there for you, just so that you could see how we might document the toString method. Now let's use our toString. Here's what's really cool. I'm going to construct a new room object, and I'm just going to use the default constructor. And now what I want to do is I want to print a room object. Here's something that's really neat. If I go system.out.println my room, I am not actually physically or explicitly invoking the toString method. However, this should still work. Make sure we've saved all of our changes, and I'm going to compile and execute. And you'll notice that it actually printed the result of my toString. When you pass an object variable into a print, printf, or print line, it will automatically call the toString method and send the output into the println print or printf, whichever one you're using. This is how toString works. Now, of course, you can explicitly call toString, but you don't have to. Why would you want to do that if you don't have to? It's less typing to just say the object variable, in this case, my room. So that will automatically call the toString. Cool. Now, what happens if your class doesn't have a toString? For example, I actually did not add a toString in the cat class. So what happens if I print the cat1 object? When I run the program, this is the output that I see. This part here is the package that this class belongs to. You can actually see I'm importing the cat class up there. So this is the package the class belongs to. This is the class name, and then we get this @ symbol and this weird set of characters. The output that you see is the default toString. When a class has no toString method, Java will execute a default version which prints the fully qualified name of the class followed by an @ symbol followed by something we call a hash code. A hash code is too complicated to explain here, but a simple and slightly incorrect explanation is that it's a value assigned to the object to help identify it when objects are compared to each other. It's kind of like that object's memory address, but it's not exactly its memory address. However, if you wanted to simply say it's the object address for now, that's totally acceptable. In later courses, you'll learn more about the hash code and what it's used for. Of course, feel free to look it up online if you're curious. So a default toString returns the class name of this object and its hash code. Try this exercise. Go to your item class and add a toString that returns an item as a string. The string representation of an item should be the actual item ID followed by a colon, then the quantity, and then an @ symbol and the price formatted with a $sign and 2 decimal places. Pause the video, give this exercise a try, and then resume the video and I'll show you the solution. Hopefully you had a chance to give that exercise a try. Here's an interesting solution. When you create the toString method according to the specifications I gave you, you'll have public string toString, and you'll have return string.format with the formatted string. Now you might have noticed that this is exactly what we were doing in the display item method. So we actually no longer need the display item method. We can just replace that with the toString method. So you can actually delete the display item method now from your item class. If I want to use this new toString method in my test program, all I do is I comment out or just get rid of my statement that invokes the display item method and replace it with a print line that just prints the object variable, because remember, that's an implicit call to the toString method. If I save, compile, and execute this program, there's the exact same output we would have seen had we used the display item method. But the toString is a bit more polymorphic. Most programmers will expect to see a toString method in the class, so it's much better to have the toString method than to have the old display item method. A Java programmer is more familiar with the toString method, and it's just less work for them. They won't actually have to look up in the documentation if there's a display item and see what it does and how it works. They already know how a toString probably works, so they can just use it without having to look it up. So that's how you can display objects by using a toString method. You'll find that the toString method is going to crop up again in term 2 when you learn about inheritance and when you learn JavaFX. But for now, just make sure you understand how to code a toString in your object-oriented classes and how it works. In the next video, we'll finish off our lessons on coding object-oriented classes by learning how to add code that compares two instances. I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching.